Hi everyone, I'm Ken Fisher of the Tigro. Welcome to our virtual coffee series, Leaders Adapt to the New Normal. Today we're focusing on the latest updates to the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. We're also going to hit on the other SBA programs. Our strategic partners in my company at Tigro have put together a series to address issues that are top of mind to small and medium businesses. We intend to continue the series throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, which looks to be a longer series than we initially anticipated, but we're going to keep going. We think a lot of the changes in how we're doing business will be with us for some time to come. Our desire is to provide business owners and executives actionable information so they can make informed decisions about how to adapt their organizations to the new normal. This week, we're going to hear from our favorite U.S. Small Business Administration Loan Officer, Rod Johnson, on Ppp Forgiveness, as well as an update on other SBA programs. Our panelists, Wendy Kessel, CFO Restart, Stu Sorkin of Business and Legal Advisors, and Lane Hornfeck of Schulman Rogers, will then ask questions of Rod, which are either from you, the audience, or they have heard from their clients about these programs. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. These sponsors have made it possible to reach the community as well as provide support for these events. In addition to our partner sponsors, we have community sponsors, the Special Needs Alliance and Tyson's Regional Chamber of Commerce, which have also helped us promote the events. And if you feel like we're providing a service to the business community in these forums, we would like to invite you to help us spread the word. If you see an upcoming event email, please send it to others. And if you see one of our LinkedIn posts, please like and comment on it. We would greatly appreciate it. Now, some quick housekeeping notes. In order to keep the conversation orderly, I will be asking the audience questions after our panelists are done with their questions. Please use the chat feature to ask your questions. I do have your questions, which you have submitted, so you do not have to resubmit them when you registered. In fact, we have a lot of questions from the audience this week. Please keep muted unless you're asked to clarify your questions or have a follow-up. And at the end, if we miss your question or wasn't answered completely, we will have an open mic opportunity to make sure everyone's questions are answered. And next, without further ado, Rod Johnson, and let me just bring up his slide deck.
Thank you, Ken. And good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Rod Johnson. I'm a lender relations specialist with the Small Business Administration out of the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Office. And we cover...
Rod, just a quick check. Can everyone see the SBA PowerPoint? Just want to make sure that's the case.
Yes.
Great. Go ahead. Sorry about that.
All right, that's okay. And we cover Montgomery and Prince George's County, Northern Virginia, and Washington, D.C. So Ken, if you can go down to the PPP slide, because that's what everybody wants to know about is the PPP. So if you recall, the PPP was supposed to go out until June 30th. It was extended until August 8th for companies across the country to go ahead and apply. Well, there's still $130 billion left of PPP, and we don't know what's going to happen with that money yet, as Congress still has not come up with additional funding for PPP or EIDL. So we're not sure what's going to happen with that $130 billion. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention is the debt relief that was also passed under the CARES Act, where you can actually have your loan payments suspended, whether they're SBA loans or non-SBA loans. So if you have a 504, 7A, a microloan, or a disaster loan from the Office of Disaster Assistance, then you can actually ask for up to 6 months deferment on those loans. If you have a non-SBA loan, a line of credit, a term loan, then you can also ask your bank to defer up to 6 months. This will not impact your paydex score, your DMB paydex score. It will not impact your FICO score. And for the banks, they will not be negatively impacted, because typically if you have a loan that's actually 90 days past due, it usually goes on non-accrual, and the regulators don't look favorably upon the bank when they have too many of those loans on non-accrual. But because of COVID-19, then the banks actually do not have to worry about being negatively impacted. Now, so we're into the forgiveness period. And there are a lot of questions that are coming up about forgiveness. And to be frank with you, there are a lot of questions that you all have out there as business owners that frankly Congress has not addressed yet. And they'll come up probably in the question and answer period. But I just wanted to let you know that there's some issues that Congress still needs to address. And hopefully they'll do that over the coming weeks so that we can take some of the stress and strain off of you business owners, because we're getting close to the end of the year, and there will be some tax consequences if Congress does not deal with some of these issues. But let me go over some of the questions that I've been receiving over the past few weeks. So for example, as you know, there are two forms. There's the Forgiveness EZ form, and there is what I call the Forgiveness Long form. And if you are a sole proprietor, independent contractor, or single member LLC, what the advice has been is to just go ahead and use the EZ form. If you have employees, and I would say 5 or more employees, then you would use the long form. I would strongly encourage you to actually work with your CPA to actually make sure that everything on that long form is actually correct. Now, expenses. Everybody seems to still, even though the PPP program has been out since March 27th, people still have questions about what the PPP covers. All right, so if you remember, originally, as of March 27th, under PPP, 75% had to be used toward payroll, and 25% had to be used toward what I'll call operating expenses, okay? And so those expenses were your rent or lease payment, the interest on a commercial mortgage, gas, water, electric, your internet bill, your cell phone that you're using for business purposes. All right, so that was your 25%. All right, then as of June 5th, President Trump signed the Ppp Flexibility Act. And so now only 60% of the funds had to be used toward payroll, and 40% could be used for the expenses that I just named. And so that is how currently the PPP money that you received is supposed to be used. The money is not supposed to be used to upgrade your website, hire a business development person, use it toward an acquisition of another business. The things that I just mentioned are what the PPP funds are supposed to be used for. As you've seen in the news, there have been companies that have been prosecuted for using PPP money for other than the purposes that I just named. So please use the funds within the context of why the whole PPP program was designed, which was really to keep employees, your employees, on the payroll for as long as possible, okay? Now, I got a question about, can e-documents or e-signatures be used for the loan forgiveness applications? And the answer is yes. All right, so what documentation do you need? Because that's been a big question, and some of my CPAs on the line can actually jump in here. But what I've said is, hopefully what you've done with the PPP money is you've opened up a separate account and just dumped the PPP money in that account. And so you've run the allowable expenses through that account. And so you'll have the bank statements from that account, you'll have your 941s, you will have any invoices that show that a bill is due. And so you'll have all of that to be able to submit, you know, to the bank for forgiveness. So what's the timing of the forgiveness? So the bank has 60 days actually to review your application. Now, if you made any errors in any of your calculations, now is the time to actually correct those, okay? You don't want to wait until the SBA actually gets the package from the bank and then say, oh, I made a mistake. So if you made a mistake early on, make the corrections now when you're submitting your application for forgiveness. So again, the bank has 60 days to review, and then the bank will send it over to the SBA, and the SBA has 90 days to review the bank's request for your loan forgiveness, and then the SBA will inform the bank of whether or not your loan has been totally forgiven or partially forgiven. So just actually build in about 6 months, because it is really a 5 to 6 month process for the forgiveness of this loan, okay? Another question was, do I have to make any loan payments during the forgiveness process? And the answer is absolutely not. You've asked for forgiveness, it's just going through the process, so there are no loan payments that you need to make whatsoever. The only time that you'll make a loan payment is when it's been determined that a portion of the loan is not forgiven. Now,
Rod?
yes.
That raises a question in my mind is, if it's going to take 6 months and someone waits towards the end of the year, do we have an issue where they're going to go beyond the 1 year period to technically, at 12 months, you're supposed to start making payments on the loan? Is the legislation written that it's the later of 12 months after the loan starts, or loan forgiveness not being granted, or how does that interplay?
You know, honestly, there hasn't been any guidance on that. That question has been raised, but there hasn't been any guidance on that yet. And so we hope that that's one of the questions that will be addressed. Okay. Now, one of the things that's also come up is, can I use the PPP money? This one was a big one. Actually, yesterday when I was on another Zoom, was because a person actually did this. They actually used the PPP money to pay down on their current bank's line of credit. And I almost had a heart attack. I said, no, you're not supposed to use PPP money to pay down an existing line of credit that you have with your bank. And so that's going to be definitely a no-no. So offline, I did ask the borrower what bank that he used. He told me, and I got in touch with the bank, and we're going to actually work that work that situation out. So please, please do not use PPP money to pay down existing lines of credit with your bank. Do not use PPP money. This was another one to actually update your website. Please use the PPP money within the context in which it's supposed to be, used for, because I'm seeing too many prosecutions come through, or situations being referred to the investigator general where people are not using the PPP funds in the manner that they're supposed to be used in. Also, this is another big one that came up yesterday. There were a couple of firms that used PPP money to acquire another company. Definitely a no-no. All right, so here's what we're finding. So companies are now beginning to sell because they're seeing that they can't go it alone anymore. So they're selling to their competitors. Now, under the SBA guidelines, if you have a PPP or EIDL or any SBA loan, then you have to notify, in this case for PPP, your bank, and then the bank will notify the SBA, but the SBA must be notified that your company is being sold and the SBA will have 60 to 90 days to determine if the sale can go through, okay? So it's very important that if you're looking to purchase a company or if you're a seller, that you have to let the SBA know that that is what you're doing, particularly when you have the EIDL or the PPP. I mean, the best situation would be before you sold the business, if you could actually pay off, you know, the EIDL or PPP. But you know what? And that's what our attorney said to me. But I said, you know, and realistically, they wouldn't need the PPP or EIDL if they had that kind of cash lying around. So let's just make sure that the SBA is notified that you're selling your business, particularly if you have an EIDL or PPP, so that you can get the proper approvals and everything is in place. Now, there's another loan that the SBA has just rolled out called the CARL. It's the Community Advantage Relief Loan. That loan goes up to $250,000. Actually, there are only 2 organizations right now that are actually giving CARL loans, and that's the Latino Economic Development Corporation and the Washington Area Community Investment Foundation. Those are the 2 entities that are actually doing CARL loans. The terms of those loans are up to, and they're loans, so there's nothing forgivable about it. They're actually loans. They're up to $250,000. They're 5-year loans, and typically those loans are made in underserved communities, okay? And what comes with that loan is technical assistance. So that's the CARL loan that's actually just been rolled out within the last couple of weeks. The other loan is the Main Street Lending Program that has been funded actually under the CARES Act to the tune of $600 billion. It's a Federal Reserve program though. It's not an SBA or Treasury program. It's a Federal Reserve program. Now, the minimum loan that you can ask for is $250,000. You can have a EIDL or a PPP, but this is a regular loan. This is not, there's nothing forgivable about this loan. Like under EIDL, for a while, up to $10,000, you would get an advance and that was forgivable. Or under PPP, as long as you use the funds in the proper manner, you know, at the end of it, then you would have a forgivable, you know, loan. Well, under the Main Street Lending Program, it is actually a loan program. And you would actually deliver a financial package to these banks, because there's only a limited number of banks right now that are participating. United Bank, Freedom Bank, Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. Those are the only banks right now that have signed up to participate in this program. The interest rate on this is anywhere from 2.5% to 4%. There's a 5-year payback, and here's how the payback works. So for the first 12 months, the borrower doesn't pay anything on the loan. In years 2 and 3, you pay interest only on that loan. And during years 4 and 5, you make a 15% curtailment on the principal amount of the loan. And then at the end of the 5th year, you have this 70% balloon payment that you have to make. All right, so that's your Main Street Lending Program. Yes, you have to give personal guarantees. You have to give some sort of collateral, whether that's a blanket lien on the assets of your business. And again, it's a 5-year loan, and your single member LLCs, sole proprietorships, and 1099 contractors can actually apply for this loan according to the documentation. But I don't see too many, if we will, small businesses actually applying for the program, but at least it's out there and you know about it, okay? But again, it's a loan. It's not anything forgivable about this program at all. And you cannot use the Main Street Lending Program money. Again, you can't use it to hire a business development person or, you know, update your website. It is strictly for you to be able to keep people on your payroll, okay? So that's really the purpose of that lending program. Now, idle, right now, there's still money left in idle. We think that within the next 2 weeks, the money that's in the idle program will probably run out. If you recall, there was about $120 billion that was funded for idle. 20 billion of that was set aside for, what they call the advance or grant. That money ran out about a month ago, so that's done. So now that's all that's left for idle is actually the loan program, okay? And remember, this is a 30-year loan where you don't have to make payments on it for the first 12 months. The interest rate is 3.75% if you're a for-profit business, or 2.75% if you're a nonprofit business. If your loan amount is $25,000 and up to $150,000, because $150,000 is the maximum, then yes, you will personally guarantee and offer collateral for the loan. And there is no prepayment penalty if you want to repay the money early for idle. Now, I end with this. I keep seeing articles, and I'm hearing internally within the SBA that there will be additional funding for idle and PPP. We just don't know when that's actually going to occur. And then for issues surrounding forgiveness and the tax consequences surrounded because of the forgiveness of the loan, there's supposed to be another interim ruling coming out about that in another 2 to 3 weeks. So just hold on. There'll be more to come on, this forgiveness process for PPP. And with that, I'll wait until the end to start answering questions.
Hey, Rod, before our panel starts, I just had one question that you kind of touched on. You mentioned about submission, and some people are saying that their bank's portals aren't open yet, but they're ready to submit for forgiveness. So are there ways for them to go ahead and proceed even though their bank is not ready?
No, they have to wait until the banks, and I heard this yesterday, and actually I was surprised because I hadn't received that feedback. So what I was told, because I asked internally, and I said, well, can the submissions be made directly to us at the SBA? And the answer is no. They have to wait until their banks open their portals for forgiveness. Some of the banks are not opening their portals because they're waiting for Congress. They're hearing that Congress is going to have another round of PPP, particularly PPP and idle. And so some of the banks are thinking the rules are going to change on forgiveness. So why go through the headache now of looking at these applications for forgiveness when the rules are going to change? So
and are the banks?
So that's what I'm getting right now internally at the SBA.
And do the banks make that determination about forgiveness, or is that in the hands of an SBA officer?
Well, actually the banks are participating in the program voluntarily. So actually the banks make that decision on that. All the SBA can do is strongly encourage them to do things, but we don't have jurisdiction over them.
Okay, panel, let me open it to you. Who would like to go first?
I have a relatively simple question that seems to keep coming up regarding just getting a status and calling in. Is there any anticipated change in that process or the lines of communication for our borrowers?
All right, so the borrowers actually, if it's PPP, then the borrowers actually should be communicating with their banks, not really us. Now, if it's idle, then they actually call the 800 number for idle. But if it's PPP, it's definitely with the banks.
But then with idle, when they call in, how is there anything changing? Because some are just getting an answer that they don't have a status or not getting any type of specific answer.
They should, well, there's not a specific person. And actually what I used to have a back channel. So I would tell people to call me. And then I could actually call my friend that was down there, and she could give me status on people's loans. But now she's left the Office of Disaster Assistance to go to another agency. So I don't have a contact to be able to, get a status or an update on where people are. So now you just have to dial the regular 800 number and get who you get.
Okay, thanks. I have another question, but I'll wait.
All right, Rod, on EIDL, there are specific provisions that say you can't make distributions to owners. That means that if you're an S or an LLC, that means you can't take a tax distribution at this point, as typically is done with an S corp, since you pay taxes on the income. Is that correct?
And that's correct.
And then the second question is, if you own your real estate in a separate entity and you're paying your rent potentially as a preference to other creditors, is that going to potentially violate that same rule?
That same rule. And the answer is yes. So something has to be done about that. It really does.
I have some other questions, but I'll let Wendy maybe take her turn, and we can sort of go back around again.
Rod, my question for you is, a lot of my clients are trying to decide whether they would do 8 or 24 weeks. And there was some original thoughts that we should go ahead and file. If you have 10 weeks, maybe your 10 weeks would maximize. You would go ahead and file your 24-week application and just let it go, even though the 24 weeks hasn't passed by. But I understand that might not be the case, and I want to make sure that it's shared with our group and all the people on the panel.
I was a big proponent of, go ahead and file. Let's just say you've used your 8 weeks has gone by, okay, because typically it was 8 weeks. Okay, you've hired back your people, you've used the money, and I was saying, you know what, go ahead and file. Let's not wait until December 31st, okay, and then, because that's when everybody was going to file. And I said, let's not wait until then, just go ahead and file. Well, now I've changed my tune on that. And I'm saying, let's actually wait until probably the middle of September or October, and let's see what Congress does, because there's going to be rule changes. And so let's not be in a hurry to try to file. The other thing is, practically speaking, some of the banks haven't even opened their portal yet to even accept the forgiveness application. So really now I'm just saying, let's just wait until middle of October. Hopefully Congress will pass, new rules for this whole forgiveness process and deal with some of the tax consequences that are out there that business owners have to deal with.
I think that's a very good idea. And one of the things I've been suggesting to my clients is that they wait for the full 24 weeks to go by, which for most is the earliest is October, because when the portal opened, most of the money didn't come in until around the middle to the end of April for any of the people that were like right on the cusp of getting it the first round. So I think that's great advice. And this is also a great time, I think you would agree, for them to put together their paperwork and make sure that they have every single document. That's really important. And I've been advising my clients to just really, even if you file the easy application, look at the instructions for easy and look at the instructions for the regular application and see all the documents that you need to retain, the ones that you need to give to your bank now and the ones that you're supposed to retain, and go through it and make sure you have all that information, saved somewhere safe or printed out in a binder somewhere. Either way, just make sure you have all those documents.
Now, here's the other thing. All right, so let's suppose you get the forgiveness, and this is for PPP and then also for EIDL. All right, just remember now, the SBA has 6 years, up to 6 years, to come back and audit you. Okay, so keep those records in a safe place.
For sure. Yes, that's what we've been advising as well.
I think that goes to something, thank you, Wendy, that goes to something you had said earlier, Rod, about correcting your information, and that you should definitely do that when you're submitting an application for forgiveness. But what if if you decide not to apply for forgiveness, let's say you make that determination.
Really? Okay.
Some are concerned about the tax consequences of it. And I think that's another question that we have. But what happens if you do have information, you realize you have misinformation you provided inadvertently, and you need to correct it? I'm hearing from you, you definitely recommend to companies and to borrowers to self-correct.
Yes, yes. Yeah, do not let the bank do it. The borrower should do it. Because then the banks may think that there was more to it than it really is. So yeah, just go ahead and self-correct.
Hey Rod, two quick questions. One, people who have not heard back from on their application for PPP or EIDL advice, they might still get it if they hand it in before the August deadline for PPP, and EIDL's still open, I think you said?
EIDL is still open, and I think the last number I heard for EIDL was like there was 5.3 million applications for EIDL. There's been a big push toward the end here of people applying for the EIDL program, and so they're just crushed. They're just crushed down there. So I'm telling people it can take 8 weeks now before they hear anything back from the Office of Disaster Assistance. Now for PPP, most of the banks had actually closed down their portal a week before August 8th because they were trying to process all the applications that they still, that had still come in. It wouldn't surprise me that they haven't still heard from their bank, because a lot of banks are still processing the PPP that came in before the August 8th deadline. So I'll just say be patient, because there were a lot. And even for PPP, I saw the number yesterday internally from the SBA, and there were 5 million applications across the country for PPP, with Bank of America and JP Morgan actually processing the most PPP applications across the country. So there are a lot of businesses that are just applying for these two programs, and that's just really crushing the bankers and the people in the Office of Disaster Assistance.
Okay, let me just insert two quick audience questions here. One is, if you don't use a computer, can you apply for PPP forgiveness? I'm not sure, could the bank handle it manually?
So they're asking, can they submit a hard copy? Yes. Go to your local, go to the bank that you got the PPP, because the banks are open and you can submit it at the branch.
Okay, and the other is asking about making the calculations easy. If they got a money on 4/29, the payroll period starts at 5/1, can they use the regular payroll period rather than exactly the day they got it?
Yeah, you can use the regular payroll period. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Pat. Go ahead and turn it back over to the panel.
Rod, obviously, as we've talked about the taxability issue of right now, the PPP. If what you're saying is correct and Congress doesn't change the taxability, and it's going to take 6 months to figure out whether or not you've got forgiven on the whole amount, you're talking about clients having to significantly extend their tax returns in order to file properly, because they won't know if the loan is only partially forgiven, then they get a partial deduction for it. If it's fully forgiven, but they won't know that by the time the tax return is due. Is that correct?
And that is, March 15th. Yeah, that is correct. Yes, that is correct. I had to think about that a second. Yes, that is correct. Yes. So you're going to do the right thing, right, and file the extension until we find out what Congress has in store. That would be the prudent thing to do, of course.
And one other question along the same lines. Since it says in the EIDL program that you can only make these related party distributions with the consent of SBA.
Yep.
is SBA considering potentially a blanket exemption if you're making a tax distribution? Because that would obviously solve some of the issues.
I was going to say that
deal.
I was going to say that would solve the issue. Okay. I have not, the concern has come up. I have not heard what the remedy is yet. Not yet.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to take over if I could. Rod, one of the questions, one of the items that Lane had brought up was some clients of hers are thinking about paying back all of the PPP money and not getting forgiveness because it is taxable at the current time.
At the current, well, why not? But why not wait? And let's just see what Congress does before you do that. Yeah. Right? I kind of see that as being a knee-jerk reaction. Let's just wait. It's only a few more weeks.
So true. And
right?
Yeah, and there's two other things that I wanted to point out about that. Is one is, okay, taxability does not mean when it's taxable, you don't pay tax on 100% of the forgiveness. You pay, you know, at your tax rate. So if you receive forgiveness of 100,000 and you're in a tax rate that's, let's say 40% between the federal and the state for your company, you're still getting 60% of that 100,000. So you still have a benefit of $60,000. And the other thing is, you know, at some point, a lot of different companies have had struggles this year and have not made the money that they've made in prior years. So it could be possible that a lot of companies aren't doing as well this year as last year. So naturally, when you add in the PPP money and that's taxable, maybe they didn't do so well this year anyway. And when you combine the fact that they might have had losses with the PPP funds, it's not a large tax bill because they have some losses that they could.
You have some losses, right? Yes. That's right. That's exactly right.
Hey, Rod. Oh, sorry. I have two questions from the audience on EIDL. One has to do with the SBA Disaster Assistance Customer Service. I've heard from a lot of people this has not been the best situation.
It is not. All right. So here's the thing with that, Ken. All right. So you have EIDL, and the EIDL was specific for COVID-19. In the meantime, you still have what the Office of Disaster Assistance was set up to do, right? Is to give aid for the hurricanes, the floods, the fires that occur across the United States, okay? And so you still have the personnel in the Office of Disaster Assistance even still dealing with those things. And there are disasters all across the country that we don't hear about on the news. Actually, I see them because I get a copy of the latest thing that the Office of Disaster Assistance is working on. And so it's hard. We are just, what should I say, human resources challenged. I mean, we really are. And I understand, because look, I even have to now use the regular 800 number to try to get through sometimes, and it's just horrible. Frankly, I can be on hold for an hour and a half, and then somebody will pick up, and then I get hung up, and then they hang up. So I understand, believe me, I understand the customer service, what it's like to call down there and not be able to really get through. So there seems to be more luck with people actually emailing, and they're getting their questions answered via email versus really picking up the phone and staying on hold for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and still not being able to get the question answered. It's hard. It's terrible. It's terrible.
And then EIDL grants, is that still a thing?
No, that's gone, dead and gone. The $20 billion that was set aside has been used. And so now with EIDL, it's just the loan. That's all that's left.
Okay, thanks. Leah, I think you had a question.
I was just going to say, I think the message that everyone should receive from Wendy is make sure you have a good CPA. It's helping you put your documentation together. It's not so much a question, but do you agree with that, Rod?
Yeah, absolutely. On all of my, presentations, I am saying, please work with your CPA. And here's an old adage that my mother used to say is don't be penny wise and pound foolish, right? So go ahead and pay the money and work with the CPA to make sure that your submission is correct the first time, okay? Because if it's not, it only delays whether or not you're going to find out if your loan was actually forgiven.
And I'd like to append to that if I could, Rod. I've not seen anywhere that you can actually amend. If you filed 8 weeks and then you decide you want to do 24, if you filed 24 and you want to go back to 8 weeks, there's no process in place for that. So the other reason to wait is let's make sure 8 or 24, which is the best for me. Perhaps you finished your PPP money at 10 weeks, but perhaps your number of staff have declined. And if your staff declines at the end of 24 weeks, then that's going to affect your forgiveness too. So there really needs to be a little bit of modeling done to strategically figure out which of the applications you would go for. Would you not agree, Rod? And could you explain to us how the 24 weeks works? You still have to have your number of employees.
Well, actually, I agree with that. But here's the thing on the number of employees. Let's make sure, because for a while, employees didn't want to return. Okay, because they were making more money eating bonbons, I'll say, than actually working. Now, I don't know if that's a referendum on the employer and the wages that he was paying, but okay, so the employee was staying home. It's important that there's an offer letter that goes out to the employees, okay, that you want to bring back, and that the employee has respectfully declined. Make sure that that's documented, okay? Because just in case at the end, like you said, you don't have as many employees as when you started, you just want to make sure that you have that documentation in place to show why you don't have as many employees on the payroll as when you started, okay? That's very important.
One more follow-up question, if I could. Do you mind, Ken? So if you're an employer and, you know, there was a lot of talk in the beginning about, did you really need the money? You're a GovCon, you should be fine. The government's still, you know, doing all the same contracts, there's no issue. Rod, what do you suggest in terms of documentation for employers to prove that they actually did need the money? You know, do you have any suggestions about what the file should look like where they obtain and hold on to anything that's related to, you know, why they needed the funds in the first place?
You know, generally, I'll just say generally speaking, the financials will show you that, right? Because typically there's going to be a dip in your revenue. And what better thing to show than your financial statements that actually show that? And you can actually show it year over year, right? That there was a dip due to COVID-19. To me, that's an easy one. The financials tell the story there.
Sounds great.
Okay. Hey, I wanted to get to some of the fresh audience questions. I think we've covered most of them that were submitted there regarding PPP and EIDL submitted in registration. So checking on status, is that with the bank, right? For PPP?
Well, they're going to submit to the bank. You're talking about for forgiveness. So they're going to check with the bank. Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to submit to the bank, and then the bank will submit it to us, the SBA. The SBA will then go back to the bank and let the bank know, and then the bank will let the client know that they've been forgiven, if you will.
Okay. But is there any way to check on the status?
No. Okay. Please do not bother the bankers with that. We already know that it's going to be a 5 to 6 month process. So don't call, because the bankers are not going to know. Because once they turn the file over to us, it's out of the banker's hands anyway.
Okay. We paid our health insurance premiums in May, and then we got the PPP funding on May 4th. We paid it on May 1st.
Okay.
This would be eligible in part of my payroll cost.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Also still waiting for EIDL funds after having to resolve with the SBA. Any clue? I mean, we went over that, right? They're just bogged down. We don't know how long.
We don't. Yeah. Oh, here's one, Ken. Mm-hmm. Suppose that you have received funding. Let's just say that your business is growing. So let's just say that you're a janitorial service company, and you're able to now go, and you got this big contract to go through and clean all the government office buildings, okay? And so now you've gotten this, I'll say $2 million line of credit, but before you got that line of credit, you got an idle loan. And remember, the idle loan requires you to pledge the business assets. You can ask for a subordination of the idle loan to that bank loan, okay? And so I just want people to know that. So yes, you can get in a subordination to the primary bank of the idle loan, because that's been a question that's come up.
And just to announce to everyone, slides will be sent out once we post this to the website, as well as the video. I think I undercalculated my FTEs on the loan application. How do I calculate the FTEs needed for my hours of operation for the loan? Would that be, so general question about calculating FTEs. Rod or maybe Wendy Stu?
Yeah, let one of the accountants answer that one.
So they're on the actual application, which you guys can pull. Anyone, if you just Google SBA forgiveness application, you should see there's two of them. One is the long form, and it's not, it doesn't say long form, it just says forgiveness application. And then there's one that's an easy form that's a lot quicker. If you go to the original long form, there's the calculations and instructions. That's what you want, because the forms are there, but the instructions are in a different section. You need the instructions for the form. Read the instructions. It's about 10 pages long, and it says specifically how to do the calculation of what your FTE number is. And if somebody works 20 hours instead of 40, if somebody works 10, there's some rounding that needs to be done. It's definitely complicated. And I'm sure you're like most of my clients, that your business is what you're great at, and it's not necessarily counting all the numbers. So make sure you incorporate some CPA help in there, or bookkeeping help. And you can of course give us a call if you need help, but make sure you have a good CPA.
We got an idle loan for $150,000 and had a lawyer look at it. He advised us there was no personal guarantee, only business assets as collateral. And we were told the interest was 3.5%. Is that correct? Because I understood there was personal assets for idle.
All right, so the interest rate is 3.75. Now, if it's under $25,000, you don't have to pledge. Frankly, if it's under 25, you don't have to pledge any assets at all.
This was 150.
Okay, so if it's 150, yeah, you should be getting a blanket lien on the business assets and a personal guarantee. That's supposed to be standard underwriting for the idle if it's over 25,000. You say this is 150, so I'm surprised to hear that one. Make sure that they've read through all the documentation, okay? Because yeah, there is a personal guarantee.
Okay.
Another point I think you need to make is that if you went to someone other than your regular lender to get your PPP money, and SBA is going to put a blanket lien on your assets, you may have a problem with your existing loans, because the bank, there may be provisions in there that you can't put seconds on your equipment, on your assets. So I think it's something that some people may have inadvertently fall afoul of their current loan provisions by taking the PPP money and not considering the regular lender.
All right, so with the PPP, there's no collateral,
no
that's personal,
right.
Yeah,
The
no personal
EDI,
guarantee.
I meant the EIDL.
You mean the idle? Yeah, the idle, then yes, you're correct. But that's why you can get that subordination. You can get the subordination with idle, okay? You actually can ask for that. And we've been actually granting that. So all you have to do is just ask on that one.
If we submit our loan request for forgiveness now and Congress releases more PPP money, are we eligible to apply for these additional funds? I think the answer is just generally, you're saying wait to apply for forgiveness.
Yep, just wait. Please.
Okay. Any plans for the SBA to forgive all loans under a certain amount? There was some talk about that, I think, from the Treasury Secretary at one point.
All right. So internally, this is what I've heard. I've heard an amount of 250,000 automatically forgiven. I've heard an amount of 150,000 automatically forgiven. Those are the two numbers internally that I have heard, batted around. But who knows if that's actually going to be the case. We just have to wait to see what Congress does on this one.
Okay. And then I think, let's see, I just want before the top of the hour, see if we have any audience questions. I understood the CARES Act specifically provides that amounts forgiven are not taxable as cancellation of debt income, but I think we covered that. But Wendy, Stu, you want to specifically comment on that, or Rod?
It's at this point in time, the IRS has announced that if you use PPP money to pay expenses, you are not allowed to deduct those expenses as on your tax return. So it's an indirect tax on the PPP money in the sense that it's not your PPP that's is taxed. It is that you lose the deductibility of the items which you use to pay the PPP money.
Very well said.
Yes.
Okay. And then our calculations included state withholding as we interpreted guidance, which increased our eligible loan amount by 3,000. Can we just base our forgiveness on the original calculation? Do we need to pay back the 3,000 if we self-correct? I guess it depends on the paperwork, and since it's a longer period, you can apply for, you just apply for what's currently eligible? Is that
the
answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And Stu, you had a point about the idle when we were doing prep. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
As I said, the real issue is that at this point in time, idle specifically states that you can't make distributions to owners. But I don't know of an S Corp or an LLC that doesn't make a distribution to their owner to at least pay the associated tax liability. So the way this is set up now, all owners of LLC who take EIDL loans can't take distributions to pay their taxes, even though their taxable income is potentially going up because of the PPP money. So you've got a double whammy that you may end up having increased tax liability and nowhere to get the cash to pay the tax liability because you can't make distributions even if you have the cash under the EIDL program.
Okay. And then Lendio, is Lendio approved? Because some people are concerned they haven't heard back from Lendio. Is Lendio an approved lender for PPP?
Well, actually, yeah, the short answer is yes. But really what Lendio does is they work with a group of lenders. Okay, so they're actually more of a broker than actually a direct lender.
Okay. But
yes, the short answer is yes, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I actually saw their paperwork, so yes.
Okay. We were told that all payroll costs paid during the covered period were eligible for the forgiveness. Now they're telling us we have to prorate costs. Is that accurate? Not sure.
Yeah. Prorate costs? Have you guys heard that?
I haven't heard anything.
I haven't heard anything about that.
Okay. Okay.
Neither have I.
Okay. If we have a semi-monthly pay period, could we use paid labor hours for respective payroll for FTE calculation?
So are they saying they get paid, they pay every 2 weeks? Is that what you're hearing, guys? Is that they're paying every 2 weeks?
Could we use paid labor hours for respective payroll for FTE calculation? You'd almost have to use the paid labor hours for FTE calculation, right?
Yeah, they get paid at a certain rate times the number of hours.
Okay. Tim R has a follow-up. Tom R, sorry, Tom R. I think I tried to unmute you, Tom. Yep, I did. So go ahead, Tom, what's your follow-up?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask regarding the tax issue and the way, Stuart, you described the offsetting indirect tax. Is there any way that tax is anything other than a full dollar for dollar offset? Like, is there, I don't see any way that it could be anything less than a dollar for dollar. Okay.
Yep, I would say it has to be dollar for dollar, which is why this is going to make this filing season for 2020 very difficult, because you may not know what your forgiveness is, and that's going to obviously affect your tax liability if you have only a partial forgiveness. So you're going to end up either filing your return and then filing an amended return, or you're going to have to wait until you get approval, and that obviously could, as Rod said, could take up to 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Just to follow up for clarification, so what I'm asking though is the tax on the deductibility of the expense. There's no differential in the amount of that deduction, percentage wise, or with any particular type of expense. It's all exactly the same, whether it's the revenue side that's not taxable or is taxable, or the expense side. It's all going to be 100% tax issue either way.
That is correct. There is no proration. It's unlike what you would see in trust tax, where they say if you have tax exempt income, we're going to make you recapture a percentage. There does not seem to be anything that's talking about any kind of percentage. It says if you use PPP money for this purpose, it's deemed effectively all tax-free income, therefore no deduction of anything that's used to pay it.
And we're at the top of the hour. I want to encourage the panel to continue asking questions, but I want to see if the audience has any last questions. This will be the open mic part. I don't see anything else in chat. Is anyone not clear on anything that we've discussed or has a question that wasn't answered? If our PPP funds are used by the 12th week on the forgiveness application, can you use the FTE count on that day, or do you have to go to the 24 weeks? So can you slice and dice that period?
I think that's a good question for Rod, because as far as I see, it'd be the 24 weeks.
Yes.
The 24-week number.
Yeah.
But it's some of the original guidance that came out when the applications were put out. I understand why this person is questioning that, why Gail is questioning, because I did see that you could submit it at 10 weeks and use the 24-week application.
That's right.
You wouldn't know your 24-week number, right? So, but your employees could decline. Maybe you're a seasonal business, and when it starts getting colder, you lose a lot of your staff. So at 24 weeks, you're going to have, 50 less employees or something like that, and that could be a big issue. So,
Any comment on that, Rob?
the 24-week number is the answer for Gail.
I was going to say that's the real answer, the 24-week.
Yes. And I think too, if you have a minute, Ken, I would just like to talk about the taxability one more time, because it came up several times today, and I have to drop off in a minute. I have another meeting, but I did want to talk about taxability. So from a financial statement perspective, every business owner that took a PPP loan should have on their balance sheet the loan showing as a liability on the balance sheet, right?
Yes.
And then if you don't get it forgiven, you're going to need to pay 1% interest. So from a financial perspective, you should be accruing every month 1% interest on that loan until that time that it's forgiven. Okay? Now, when you put your forgiveness application in, you put it in with your bank. The bank has 60 days to decide. Then the bank sends it, whatever their disposition is, to the SBA, who has another, I believe, 90 days.
90 days. That's right.
90 days. So like Rod had said earlier on the call, it's a 5-month process. During that whole period of time, you should continue to accrue that interest, even though it's minimal, but it should be accrued. But then at the time when you're forgiven, you don't have to pay the interest on whatever's forgiven, and you would reverse it and take the benefit. Now, one last thing is, when you've got that liability on your balance sheet and you get forgiven, the liability comes off. So you would debit that liability, and you would credit on your income statement an account called gain on extinguishment. That's how the AICPA has said that we should be treating this. So you have an other income section on your financials at the bottom, not in regular revenue, that says gain on extinguishment and has the amount of that PPP loan. And so basically, tax-wise, what Rod was saying earlier and Stu was sharing is that when you look at your financial statement, you've got your revenue, you've got your expenses for payroll, rent, etc. And then when you go to file your taxes, you take that information, and if you're cash basis or accrual basis, it doesn't really matter. Bottom line is those payroll costs that you had that you used to offset the PPP would be taken away, and you don't get to use them as a deduction. So whatever, if it's 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever period of time that you use those payroll costs, whatever rent you use towards the PPP, that's not a deduction for you anymore. Because as far as the IRS is concerned, you use that deduction when you apply for PPP forgiveness, and they don't allow double dipping. And they would think that's double dipping. And that's the, when Sue was referring to the code, the IRS code, that's what he means, that's where the double dipping comes in.
One last question from the audience. Can you repeat info regarding the deadline for filing for forgiveness? And that clearly hasn't occurred yet. Is there a deadline at this point?
Rod, do you want to take that? I don't,
It's
Rod?
frozen.
Rod's frozen.
So I'll share. The deadline is 10 months from the 8 weeks if you're filing an 8-week application, or 10 months from the 24 weeks if you're filing a 24-week application. So essentially, if you got your money somewhere in April, which that's the earliest got it, then add your 8 weeks and then add 10 months to there, and that's when you'd need to file by. That's the deadline to file with your bank.
Wendy and Rod's back. Can I ask one question that came out of what you just said? And I don't know if anyone else is wondering this. The way you represented it, that you apply for the forgiveness and then the bank decides, is it discretionary, or are there just factors you meet and it should be approved?
Well, there's bank guidelines that were given from the SBA to the banks. And that's why none of the portals could open until just recently, because the banks weren't receiving any of the guidelines. And, you know, Rod, please, if you want to jump in on this, essentially without the guidelines, they can't move forward, right? So the SBA has given specific guidelines to the bank. From what I understand from my bank contacts, it should be relatively simple. They receive your documents, they apply them based on the law, and then they say yes or no and send it through. But there could be issues with, let's say if you have over 500 employees and maybe you have over 500 employees, but you fall under the 72A exemption, that you're in a special
NAICS code.
Right, a NAICS code, and it's okay for you to have more than 500. That might be something that might require a little extra documentation or things like that.
A question for the panel. I don't know if Rod has input on this. It's not really quite along these lines with the general COVID issue. Contractors applying for unemployment insurance. How might that complicate employer's life? Is that
so? It depends. Were they receiving unemployment and then he was bringing them back? All right.
Well,
so if they were on
I read it as you had a contractor whom you no longer, like a sole proprietor that you were employing, and now they're applying for unemployment insurance. I don't know if this may be the case they weren't paying themselves a W-2. I don't know. So I don't know if there's anything happening like that, a phenomenon where contractors are coming back applying for unemployment where they normally wouldn't be qualified, but they're showing a 1099 for unemployment. Okay. I just figured I'd throw it out there. Okay, that's it for questions from the audience as far as I could tell. Try to get to all of them. Panel, do you have any last questions for Rod?
Well, I just think we have to wait until Congress, look, Congress is the key to all of this, right? Because we have some holes from a tax standpoint, particularly from a tax standpoint. We have some holes, right, that need to be plugged particularly for idle. All right, and then for the forgiveness process, if there's another round of PPP, then, you know, the whole forgiveness thing may be turned upside down. So we just really have to wait until Congress, and I'm hoping anyway, until they pass something by the middle of September to really give us some good guidance on a lot of the issues that we, you know, brought up this morning.
Rod,
wait, yeah.
I want to confirm that the approval of a transfer applies both to PPP and EIDL. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that's correct.
That's what I
Yes.
thought. Okay, I just wanted to make sure there was no difference.
Sorry.
Approval of a sale of the business.
Oh.
If you're going to sell your business, you need the approval if you have PPP money and or EIDL money.
Okay.
And there's one more question that came across about what can you do if you offer a job and the person rejects it? Like, do you get to count them as a 1 in your numbers for full-time equivalents? And that's not really where it comes into play. Where it comes into play is, like I'm saying, look at those forgiveness applications, and to do the EZ application, there's some things that you don't have to worry about. And the number of employees, there has some special rules for that. On the EZ application, there's check boxes, and where the offer letter that isn't accepted comes into play is on those check boxes. It said, if you are have offered jobs to people and they haven't been able to take them, or you've been unable to open because the government has still shut down whatever service whatever service you provide, you're still not allowed to open your doors, then you fall under special rules as far as full-time equivalents. Maybe Rod could speak to that for a minute if he has the time.
Actually, I have to go.
Okay.
Yeah, we can pick it back up. Kim, are we going to have this in another 3 weeks?
It seems like we're going to need to. I was anticipating these issues would be, you know, wrapped up, but clearly that's not going to be the case.
I would suggest we might want to wait till we actually have legislation before having the next call on specifically PPP, because if we're in Never Land, then a lot of the issues we're talking about aren't going to be resolved. So I think that we have to sort of look for our next one on this particular issue, some of these issues, until after we see how soon Congress actually passes the next legislation.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Rod, for your time.
Yeah, I
Agreed. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
Panelists.
I want to thank Ron.
Thank you, Rod.
And all the panelists. I hope the audience found this helpful. I'm getting some really positive comments. One last question, maybe if I don't know if you guys have any time for it. How do you get approval? Who do you get approval from in the context of a business sale? That's SBA, but who at SBA does that?
All right. So first, particularly because most of these need financing, right? So typically the bank, and for now, I'll be the intake person because it goes to the Office of Capital Access, which is in headquarters. So just send it to me at roderick.johnson@sba.gov.
Okay.
And in fact, that's what my 11:15 meeting is actually about, is who's the proper person to actually send it to in Capital Access.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so that's
great.
Yeah, actually
Thanks
in 3 minutes.
Thanks for that answer, Rod. Great. Any wrap-up statement, Rod, or I know you have to go.
Yeah, I was going to say, let me go ahead and jump. But
Okay.
just what I can say is work with your CPAs. You business owners out there, work with your CPAs and get this forgiveness calculation correct the first time. Okay, that's what I'll leave you with.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, guys.
Yep.
And
Thanks,
putting
everybody.
it together.
Everyone have a good Friday.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Lane and Stuart.
Thank you,
Have a
guys.
great weekend.
Have a great weekend.